Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to the Islamic thought, and to Ijaz Hussain and Sheikh Maqbul, who have been so kind as to arrange for my visit here. And it really is an honour to be able to present to you some of my thoughts and reflections on a topic which is probably too much for a short 30-minute presentation: understanding justice, law and community debate in the Nahjul Balagha. I've been told many times in the preparation up to today that I have to remain strictly to time. So I'm taking off my watch. I will put it there. I have a brother here who is going to remind me when I go on too long. You speak with any of my students, they will say that I'm quite a talkative sort of person. So I will hopefully manage to compress what I want to say into the time period we've got. The Nahjul Balagha, I think it is true to say, is a very difficult text. Anyone who tells you that it's simple, I think, may have misread it. What is the point of the Nahjul Balagha? It's written in this beautiful Arabic, wonderful Arabic, that really to gain the depth of meaning from it, you need many years of study. A simple translation, rather like a translation of the Quran, will not, we feel, touch the meaning or replicate the expression, the beauty of the expression. It's an extremely difficult text to translate. And what's the point of the text? Is the point of the text to describe the beauty of the Arabic language, to give an example? And it was certainly used as an example of high-level Arabic prose through the centuries. This is why it appealed across the whole Muslim world and not purely to within the Shia community. It appealed as an example of Arabic spoken and written at its highest level of beauty and eloquence. Its name, the peak of eloquence, as it could be translated, indicates the beauty of the Arabic within the text. So is the point of the text to show off about how competent the speaker was in Arabic? Or is there a deeper meaning? A meaning which is expressed through this beautiful Arabic, but with the point of the Nahjul Balagha is to convey certain truths, moral truths, to the hearers. It's a debate which has gone on for many centuries as to whether the prime characteristic of the Nahjul Balagha is its message or its mode of expression. When you're working and reading the Nahjul Balagha through a translation, you are primarily interested in its message. So, with that in mind, I wanted to focus today on whether we can think of underlying the beautiful Arabic and the challenging way in which the constructions in Arabic are put together. If we can put that, if we can look underneath that to a sort of a moral framework which is attempting to be conveyed by the text. What's the relationship between that text, first committed to writing in the 11th century, and the lifetime and the sayings of Imam Ali himself many centuries previous? And then what's the relationship between that text and what we might want to think about the moral messages of it today? These are challenging questions, some of which cannot be answered simply. So it's a difficult text. It's difficult because the Arabic is difficult. But it's also difficult because some of the messages which it conveys are challenging. I would go so far as to say that it's a revolutionary text. It's revolutionary because some of the messages and some of the character traits it reveals of the speaker are of a deeply human person who struggles with decisions. Perhaps more than many elements of the Nahjul Balagha, there are controversies in the sermon known as the Shaqshaqiyya. In that sermon, you have the speech of a person who describes the decisions he's made at different points in the past. Whether to challenge what he saw as injustice, or whether to instead keep silent and allow community unity to be preserved. When is it the time to challenge, and when is the time to allow the community's unity to be preserved for the sake of the greater good? You see within that text Imam Ali trying to decide what it is best to do. That is, and this is interesting from a historian of Islamic theological development. Imam Ali portrays himself in that speech as someone who struggled with the decision, that thought about which way to go. He is a human being who faces the same sorts of difficulties in making decisions as all human beings do, crucial points in their lives. So when he says in that sermon that he wondered about whether he should challenge or whether he should endure calmly, exhibit sabr in order to wait, he's expressing a dilemma, a moral dilemma, and a struggle which he had in order to try and come to a conclusion. He's conveying the idea that you shouldn't think of this person as purely a distant figure who's so different from the rest of us that we're unable to make a connection with him. He's saying, like you, I struggle with decisions. I face dilemmas. This isn't always the picture of the Imam that you get from later Islamic theology. You might have the theoretical and theological debates about what is the state of knowledge of the Imams of the future. What is the relationship between the Imams and God himself? And sometimes the portrayal is that the Imams are so different from us that we couldn't even hope to be able to understand what goes on in the mind of the Imam. But I would say that in some of the statements within the Nahjul Balagha, Imam Ali gives you an insight into his decision-making process, making him more comprehensible to you. That's why it's a challenging text. That's why it's a text which, from the point of view of later Islamic theology, sometimes is quite uncomfortable. And, ironically, that's why I think much of it is quite likely to be very early from a historical point of view. That is, if it was a forgery, as some have said, and it didn't go back before the 11th century, if it really was that, it would be a lot more comfortable for us to read it. It would be a lot easier to read. Actually, it challenges many of the central notions of Islamic legal thought and philosophy that were developed by different thinkers subsequently. It offers an alternative viewpoint. If it had been written in the 11th century, it would be a lot neater and fit into the general intellectual development. So that's the first thing which I'd like to try and convey to you, is the difficulty of the text. Not just that the Arabic's difficult, and it is, but also that it challenges some of the things that we might think of to be givens, theological givens. So, moving on to the first area of what I wanted to talk about, which was justice. Now, justice is talked extensively, mentioned many times within the Nahjul Balagha. And within the translations, you'll find justice used as the translation for a number of terms. Hukm, qada, adl every now and again, but mainly hukm and qada. When you look through the translations, how the translators have decided to transfer the Arabic into English, when you see the word justice, quite often it's to do with judging. And it's to do with judging in a way which is fit for purpose. In Sermon 87, Imam Ali speaks of Allah as saying, قَدْ عَلِمَ السَّرَائِرَ وَخَبَرَ الدَّمَائِرِ. That is, God knows the secret things and He's aware of your inner feelings. That is, that what is valued within this system is your internal moral compass. This is what I read it as trying to convey. That when you are examined by God, it is your deepest secrets that will be examined. When Imam Ali talks about judges, he quite regularly says that he describes a judge who sits in judgment. يتصدى للحكم بين الأمة, and then he says وَلَيْسَ لِذَلِكَ بِأَهْلٍ, meaning that that person is not worthy of taking up the position of being a judge. And Imam Ali in that sermon talks at length and critiques those people who take up positions of judging in the community. That is, they put themselves forwards as people who protect justice, but they're not worthy of taking up that position. And then he goes on to describe them. He says, وَالرَّجُلٌ كَمَشَ جَهْلًا مَوْدِفِ جَهَالِ الْأُمَّةِ. He moves amongst the ignorant people within the community. He himself is ignorant and he moves amongst the ignorant people in the community. What the point here, I think, that is trying to be made in that sermon is that being worthy to judge, putting yourself forward as a person who can take up leadership and decide on justice within the community, requires not only knowledge, but also a certain set of moral characteristics. That is, that you have to look internally. And the person who's unworthy, many of the people in his time who put themselves forward as judges were unworthy. They, in the opinion of Imam Ali, don't have the right characteristics to lead, and should never have been let anywhere near the position of being a judge. His point here, I think, is that if you want justice to be implemented in the correct manner, you have to get the right person for the job. And that person has to be someone whose natural dispositions are are properly constituted to be able to judge wisely. This person must be someone who is not taken in by the ignorant presuppositions of the age, the ignorant assumptions that we have about other people. In Sermon 232, which is a wonderful statement about, I think, racial justice, when Imam Ali says that a person can be handsome, but can be very weak in intelligence. A person can be tall, but it doesn't mean they're very brave. A person can be ugly, but he can be virtuous, which is a blessing for all of us. A person can be short, but he can actually be far-sighted in the way in which he sees things. These little couplets which Imam Ali puts together, the message of them, I see it is, you go around the world and you see people and you think that they're going to be one thing. They're actually something else. And if you want to be able to take the position of leadership in the community, and if you want to take the position of being judged within the community, then you're going to need to lose those presuppositions. You see someone with grey hair, you think they're wise, that's not the case. You see someone who's young, you think they have nothing to give, that's not the case. You have to learn to lose those presuppositions. It's a natural disposition which is found in the Nahjul Balagha as an essential element of justice in the community. And if we look at the issues that we face today, presuppositions concerning what Islam is, who Muslims are, this message is as valid today as it was when Imam Ali said it. So, the message here that Imam Ali is saying is that don't judge anything by the appearance that it faces you. Don't look to the zahir, look to the batin. And a judge in the community, if he or she is going to put forward justice within the community, then they have to be able to look beyond the zahir. And that means not just in terms of religion, in terms of race, in terms of gender. It means across the age, in terms of ages, in terms of different elements of any community. Imam Ali is giving the message that wisdom can come from anywhere. You don't judge things by what you think their source is. What does all that mean in terms of the intellectual history of Islam? I think what it reveals for me is what moral philosophers call a virtue ethics. Now, moral philosophers, I'm not expecting everyone in the room to be interested in this bit of my talk, okay? But I want to try and put this message that you find in the Nahjul Balagha into the context of the moral thinking that we have in the current day. Virtue ethics puts forward the idea that it's less important what the results of an action are, it's more important the character of the person that performs the action. That is, it doesn't judge the moral worth of an action by its consequences, it judges it by the moral character of the person that performs it. And so virtue ethics criticizes those other types of ethical theory which just look to the consequences. Imam Ali, I think, is saying that if you just look to the consequences of an action and you judge its validity by the consequences, then you move into a dangerous area of moral theory in which you start measuring goods against each other. You start comparing one good against another and deciding which one I'm going to go for, depending on what I think may well be better. Virtue ethics emphasizes that the most important thing is the character of the person doing the act. In the Islamic tradition, the most important thing is the niyyah of the individual doing the act. So in modern moral philosophy, virtue ethics is sometimes contrasted with something called consequentialism. That is, that a good action is one which has good consequences. Imam Ali is saying no, and I think he's saying no because, as he says, alima as-sara'i, qad alima as-sara'i. You do an action, you perform an action, you do not know what's going to happen, what's going to flow from it. And you should not be held responsible for the things which flow from it that you couldn't have known. what the effects of an action are many, and they come in with various factors, and they include other people and their decisions, which influence the consequences of an action. Imam Ali is saying, and in this he's in line with Shi'i theology through the ages, you can't be held responsible for someone else's actions which affect the consequences of your actions. What's the most important thing is for you to develop within yourself a moral character, which means that you are always aiming to do the correct thing. So, leave the results of your actions to God. Make sure that your intentions when you do them reflect your moral character. And that is a difficult thing to say in the modern period, to an extent, because politicians and many people who might put themselves forward as leaders quite often are only interested in the consequences of their actions. Something is justified because it brings about this effect or that effect. We have to think, if we're going to take the message of the Nahjul Balagha seriously, slightly differently. That what matters is developing within yourself the moral characteristics such that you perform good actions. So justice is tied up, not necessarily with unknown and unpredictable consequences in the future, but in yourself, in the cultivation of yourself as a moral individual. The second thing which I wanted to mention was the notion of law. Now, Imam Ali in the Nahjul Balagha talks quite regularly about the different opinions of the ulama and critiques the different opinions of the ulama. And he says at various points that people, the people who put themselves forward as ulama, quite often in his day gave opinions on baseless foundations. In Sermon 18 he says, when a problem is put before any one of the ulama, he passes judgment on it from his imagination. When exactly the same problem is placed before another of them, he passes an opposite verdict. Then these judges go to the chief who appointed them, and he confirms all the verdicts. But you must remember that God is one, their prophet is one, and their book, the Quran, is one and the same. The tendency to express your own opinion rather than base it within the moral message that Imam Ali is trying to convey, I think is what he is critiquing here. He's worried that in terms of law, and I speak broadly in terms of Sharia, in terms of law, there is a failure on the part of the interpreters of his day to really penetrate the true nature of what law aims to do within a community. It aims to establish a moral framework in which people can act, rather than as a mechanism for promoting one opinion over another. And if we try and transfer those messages into community debate, then we have a series of messages, I think, coming from an interesting passage in the Nahjul Balagha, in which Imam Ali outlines the characteristics of the different transmitters of the knowledge of the Prophet's Sunnah. One person asks him about why the people within the community have different transmissions of the Prophet's Sunnah and they have different opinions about it. And Imam Ali says that within the community there is truth and falsehood, haqq wa batil, وَصِدْقًا وَكَذْبًا, truthful people and lies, نَاسِخ وَمَنْسُوخ, things which are not abrogated and things which are abrogated, عَيْمًا وَخَاسًا, general things and specific things. And he lists these different categories. And the problem, he goes on to say, is that there are 4 types of people who transmit knowledge of the truth. There is, first of all, the hypocrite. That is the one who intentionally misleads the people with a false word. Of course, the munafiq is a theme that you find both in the Quran and in the early Islamic history. So, the first category is the munafiq. The second is a transmitter who forgets. It says in the Nahjul Balagha, سَمِعَ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ سَمِعَ شَيْئًا وَلَمْ يَحْفَظُ عَلَى الْوَجْهِ. He doesn't preserve it according to its wording, you might say. He hears what the Prophet said, but he doesn't preserve it according to its words. وَلَمْ يَتَعَمَّدْ كَذِبًا. He doesn't intend to lie. But unfortunately, he transmits something which is untrue. He doesn't intend to lie. That's important. That's the second characteristic. That's the second transmitter. The third transmitter is one who hears the Prophet's word, the Prophet ordering a thing, and then forbidding it, and doesn't know what to do about it. And his problem is that he حَفِظَ الْمَنْسُوخ وَلَمْ يَحْفَظ النَّاسِخ. He preserves the thing which is abrogated, but doesn't preserve the thing which has already abrogated it. He might transmit the Sunnah perfectly, but he doesn't understand its position within the whole system. But once again, he doesn't do this intentionally. He does it through a lack of knowledge. And then the final characteristic is the reliable transmitter, the one who is fully immersed in the teachings of the Prophet, who knows what is nasakh and what is mansukh, who knows what is haqq and what is batil, and is able to transmit it accurately. This, Imam Ali says at the end, is the reason for the differences, the ikhtilaf within the ummah. It's important to recognize that only one of those categories is munafiq. The other 3 do not do it intentionally. That is that the differences within the ummah, for 3 out of the 4 types of transmission, do not come about through people intentionally trying to misrepresent the message of the Prophet. But from Imam Ali's perspective, it comes about through not knowing, not immersing yourself within the message, such that you can understand its significance. And the final transmitter, the one who's the most reliable, isn't just someone who transmits it word for word. This is the other important point that Imam Ali, I think, is saying here. He's not just someone who transmits it word for word, because he says he knows the mansukh and the nasikh, and he preserves them both, but relies upon the nasikh. He knows what's general and what's specific, and he knows when they apply. That is, the usulis, the people who work on usul al-fiqh, have 2 ways in which they describe messages being transmitted. One is what they call lafzi, and one is which they call ma'nawi. A lafzi transmission is word for word. A ma'ni transmission is done by someone who understands the meaning as well as transmits the word for word. Imam Ali is saying, I think, No doubt there may be others who disagree with me, but I think he's saying here that the person that transmits the message truthfully isn't just transmitting it word for word. He's someone who understands its position within the whole system. He's someone who knows whether it's nasikh and mansukh. The person that transmits the mansukh and relies upon it is doing a lafzi transmission, but he's not necessarily transmitting the true significance of the text within the tradition. So what Imam Ali is saying is that if you want to find truth, you have to understand the way in which an individual rule fits within a whole system. The importance for community debate is that whilst the reliable transmitter is only one of the four, according to Imam Ali, three of the four may be unreliable, but they're not doing it intentionally. That is, the ethics of community debate have to be around ilm, not around insult, not around dismissal of other people's opinions. It has to be around understanding that the number of munafiq are few, and the number of people with a sound intention are many. That's the presumption you have to move into in terms of community relations. Not the other way around, that there are a majority of munafiq and I'm the only one who is sahih. And I think that that is one of the most pertinent messages, not just for people within the Shi'i community or the broader Muslim community, but also our society more generally. That when you want to understand the message, it has to be set within a broader framework of knowledge and learning and understanding. And that although it might be tempting to look at people who take a different view to yourself as having gone wildly astray, actually the message of Imam Ali is this is only one of the types of transmitters of the Sunnah. There are three other types. That's not to say that there isn't truth out there, but that you have to understand the intentions of most people who engage in intra-community discussions is to find the truth. These are difficult things sometimes to fully convey outside of a knowledgeable audience such as yourself, but I think that they're important messages. And if we approach the Nahjul Balagha with those sorts of intentions, if we approach the Nahjul Balagha with those sorts of intentions, then I think that we will hopefully be able to understand that the difficulty of the text should not be a barrier to its relevance. There's no getting away from the fact that there are elements of the Nahjul Balagha which are difficult in the 21st century. One looks particularly at, for example, Sermon 13, which begins, Kuntum Jundal Mara. When he's talking, when Imam Ali is referring to the forces opposing him, led by Aisha, he says, you are an army led by a woman. I felt deeply uncomfortable when I read that. And not because I necessarily think that the forces of Aisha were in any sense justified in their opposition to Ali, but that their deficiency, if you like, was not in the fact that they were led by a woman. That's not the important element of the forces. There were other things. So the text itself needs to be investigated and understood. Similarly, those who know the Nahjul Balagha will know that there's a phrase with it, Inna an-nisa nawaqis al-iman, wa nawaqis al-hutul, wa nawaqis al-aqul. Now, I don't agree with any of that. I don't agree with any of the points that women are deficient in faith or shares or in intelligence. Indeed, I would say it's anti-Quranic to hold that sort of opinion of the position of women. But it's there in the text. We have to do something about that. We have to try and understand what it's doing there in the text. Greater minds than me will maybe able to produce it, but produce a significant interpretation of it. But I would say this, that an understanding of the general moral message of the Nahjul Balagha may help us understand what Imam Ali was trying to do when these words were spoken and when they were eventually included in the Nahjul Balagha. That is, that his appeal was to a particular audience at a particular time. Or that he was implicitly attempting to undermine these sorts of moral standpoints. And we have to, many centuries later, make sense of them. And that's the challenge which I think that the Nahjul Balagha presents to us. It is a difficult text, not only because the Arabic is difficult, not only because there's some elements of it that we might not feel particularly comfortable with in the modern day, but it's also an uncomfortable text, I think, because it challenges the whole moral nature of the way in which politics and political decisions are made, and the way in which we conduct ourselves in our relations with the rest of the community. And that is the challenge of attempting to look at the Nahjul Balagha within an academic context, but also within a faith community context.